Joining you from Trackside Villa Park, one of 11 off-track betting locations in Illinois. For more information, visit tracksideotb.com with Brian W. Spencer, otherwise known as The Natural, and King James, Master of Hounds. I'm Joe Christofek from horseplayernow.com, and we're going to talk about trip handicapping. And Brian, trip handicapping is the foundation of the Horse Player Now buzz. It's all about horses to watch. A lot of these come from key races. A lot of these come from trip notes. Talk about trip handicapping and how you come up with horses that you're going to play later on down the road.
I think the first thing is that there's only so much handicapping you can do on paper. You can do a great deal of good handicapping on paper, but those running lines and those short trip notes that you're going to get in your past performances are never going to tell a true story. There's obvious trip notes to take, a horse getting stuck in the stretch in traffic with nowhere to go. But there's also a lot of different, sort of more hidden ways that you can find trouble. I think that the first turn of a route race is very frequently overlooked. People will say, oh, the horse was 4 wide on the second turn, but if the horse was 5 wide going into the first turn and the entire way around too, don't forget that, because that's ground loss too. A lot of trouble happens in the first turn that doesn't seem as big because it's sort of the beginning of the race. I mean, that's one of the first things I would say. And then horses getting taken out of their styles is another one. Speed horse with a slow break, that's the end of the day for that horse 9 times out of 10. Even a tactical pace horse who gets stuck at the back, always look for that.
I think the moral of the story is positioning is huge in horse racing, based on your style. But a lot of times when horses are learning to do something or horses are inexperienced, positioning is so key, especially in those 2-turn turf races like you're talking about. Squeeze at the start, lost ground, had to steady. Not putting yourself into the race can really be a huge disadvantage, but you may be able to take advantage of that the next time the horse runs.
Absolutely. You get the ground lost in a turn, in the first turn, I think is huge, especially I'm a big turf handicapper. Looking for a horse that, like Brian said, I'm talking trip handicapping, first thing I think of is ground lost. How inefficient was the trip? Were they strung out wide? Would they have to do a lot more work than any other horses in the race? That to me is a bad trip. So I'm looking for that kind of thing in a race. The next thing I think of when a trip handicap is inefficient trip from perspective of I can't move where I want to go. Am I stuck at the rail? Am I stuck between? Absolutely. So it's not just about the ground covered, but it's about the efficiency and the momentum of the trip. So I think if you look at those two things, you really find a quote-unquote bad trip horse.
Now, Brian, you mentioned advantages earlier in handicapping and trying to put together winning wagers. They've kind of diminished over the course of time because there's so much information in the daily racing form statistically about what trainers do what well in different categories. Trip handicapping becomes one of our advantages, especially if you go back and watch a replay multiple times.
Because the thing about trip handicapping is a computer can't do it. That's the one thing. You can have a computer essentially make your speed figures and you can make human adjustments to them. Any of that data more or less can be done automatically. Trip handicapping, that's all us. That's all you. It's something that you have to do and only your eyes can see it. One of the things that's going to be very important too is starts and stops. James talked about the efficiency of a trip. I want to get my horse into a spot as soon as possible, the spot that they want to be in, and then settle and just sit and wait. I don't want the starts and stops. I don't want the, several moves.
Free running.
I'm as big a fan as a giant middle move as anybody, but that better be the only big move that gets made up to that point.
Horses only have one move. Sometimes it's a 1/4 of a mile move. Sometimes it's a shorter move. You kind of get to know those horses. But when you're reading a chart, there's only so much the chart can tell you. There's only so much the short comment can tell you. I see a short comment that says off slowly. Did the horse lose 1 length? Did the horse lose 5 lengths? Did the horse lose 12 lengths? You can only tell that by having seen the race.
Absolutely. And the nice thing about watching the race and visualizing is how hard did the horse actually have to work to do that kind of extra ground covering. I heard a great note about Bobby Frankel. He hated when he had to take his horses wide because he felt like it might take something out of him for the next race. So yes, we might talk about the poor trip and where they had to swing wide and watch them next time, but we also have to wonder, did that extra ground or did that jostling around, did that do something to the horse? So on the converse, you could fall into that trap, which you don't ever know until you actually see him run the second time out.
I think the turf is the greatest place to find trip horses because horses usually finish with energy. They oftentimes get stopped, and they oftentimes run better than it looks on paper. So I think how much energy a horse finishes with and if they've had a tough trip to begin with, is a huge, huge thing. Horses can win without finishing with energy. And horses can run 7th, finishing with a ton of energy.
Right.
So finishing with energy, to me, visually, is something that I'm always looking for.
And the other thing too, and this will come into play in turf races a lot, one of my favorite things to look for is a horse who gets shuffled back.
Yep.
In the running line, it may just look like the horse was still settled, 3rd, 2 lengths off the pace, all of a sudden they're 5th, 6 lengths off the pace. It's not always because the horse has just settled and the rider's not saying go. A lot of times speed is quitting back into a horse, and that's where sometimes that pocket trip doesn't become so advantageous. But horses who can, get shuffled back, lose that position, and still finish with energy, those are impressive horses. Those are the kind of things that I'm looking for, and I'm saying that's a horse I'm betting next time back.
I think another thing that we sometimes overlook is sometimes animals tend to make their own trouble. And we talk
That's
about
what
trip
I'm
horses.
just going to get into that.
They sometimes
Closers
see
get in trouble. They find
trouble.
trouble.
They find trouble.
Yeah.
They somehow, every running line you see or every race you see, they somehow manage to screw themselves up. They can be skittish. Jocks can sometimes cause trip trouble as well. Sometimes if you have an inexperienced jock, he can run them up the backside of something, and we all know about that. We've had bad beats because how did that jock do that to me? That happens all the time. So keep in mind who you have riding and who was riding and who might have taken over to avoid that trip trouble again.
And since that just referenced me, we won't get into it, but the whole thing is that you can have a jock who is so good, getting a horse in great positioning. You need a jockey who is reliable, though, because one bad mistake can get you shuffled back, can get you run up off heels, can get you disqualified at a big price.
It happens to
whatever
the best
case may
jockeys
be.
too, but a lot less frequently.
Yeah, and so
Right.
that's what you want. You want a jockey that you can rely on to get you that trip so that you aren't finding that trouble unnecessarily.
Unless they break slowly, speed doesn't get in trouble. And you mentioned this earlier, that if a speed horse breaks slowly, has to rush up, use energy, maybe a playback next time. Closers always get in trouble. Sometimes the pace works in their favor, sometimes they luck out with a trip. But if you're betting a closer, chances are you may get 6 trouble trip lines in a row. And then what do you do?
And the one thing that you just brought up that I did want to make a note of too is that speed horses don't get into visual trouble, but I think there are trip notes
Pace
on
trouble.
speed horses.
Yep.
A horse who's generally used to going 46 and change in a 7 furlong race just gets hounded by 3 other horses, packs it in at the quarter pole and finishes 10th beaten 30 lengths because the jock wrapped the horse up. That's a trip note on a pace horse, but it's not something that you're going to visually see. You're not going to see the jockey take up.
Right, and we talked about energy. When a horse wins and they win handily, where they've got a ton left in the tank, or they win under a mild hand ride, you can tell by watching enough races how horses run, how horses win, and how much they might have next time around.
They really are good, and that's where you get the best jocks in. They know when to gear them down. They know when to use just enough. You don't have to win by 100 lengths. You only have to win by 2. And if they can save something left in the tank, if you can save ground, if you can get the efficient trip, it really helps move them on forward to that next race, that 2nd, 3rd, and 4th race, and leave something in the tank for a successful campaign.
Playing the races is always a fun trip.